Well, hello with Gratitude Matt listeners. It's Bill Moran here. I'm Matt's older brother, and today I will be your host of our With Gratitude Matt show. As you all know, Matt started the With Gratitude Matt podcast as a place where people can come to find the courage to be grateful, regardless of how powerful the storm. The goal with the show is to inspire more people to practice gratitude on a regular basis. Before Matt was called to heaven, he embraced the power of gratitude, which helped strengthen his relationships while deepening his faith. Please know that the entire Moran family appreciate all your love, prayers, support, and generosity. We are so grateful and blessed to be part of such a supporting, caring, and loving community. Today, I am humbled and honored to be here with our guest, Mike Kloepfer. Mike lives in San Francisco with his wife, Helen. He is a managing principal at MK and Associates, which is a construction company focused on waterproofing and roofing. More importantly, Mike has run 111 marathons around the world since 1996. And I did the math on that, and that's over 3,000 miles, 3,000 competitive miles in marathons. He's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for cancer research over these many years and many miles. And Mike is also a cancer survivor. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Good. Well, before we start talking about your amazing journey, one of the messages that Matt always had was to be present. And I think the way that you got on this show is an example of how we could be present in our lives. And the show listeners will know Mike Need is the talent behind this production of the podcast. He's been with it since the beginning. But you met Mike in an airport in Minneapolis. And if you could kind of share with the listeners how that all came about.
My wife went ahead to the gate area prior to me, and I caught up with her, and she introduced me to Mike, and they were sitting side by side getting their shoes shined. Not many people do that these days, but they were getting their boots shined and said, where are you headed? And they're going to Chicago. And my wife said that we were headed there for the Chicago Marathon, and Mike was headed there for a little business and then a Notre Dame football game.
There you go. And so then did you just mention the fact that you mentioned the marathon, of course, you're running in it, and how did it expand beyond that? Because running in the marathon, that's awesome in and of itself, but you've done so much more than that, Mike. So how did that conversation lead there?
It probably came up the fact that asked if I'd done it before, and I told him I'd done it many times before. And then, as runners are usually kind of gabby, he asked if I'd done other marathons, and we went in to talk about that.
That's pretty cool. So here we are, and I guess that's a really good example of to our listeners to be present and aware of those people around you, and you never know where those connections can take you. So before we get into your marathoning, give us a little bit of background about yourself and your family and where you grew up.
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and 0 to 10 years there, and then 6 years in Connecticut, and then 6 years in Colorado, and then I've moved around quite a bit. And even 1978, I spent a year in Rochester, Minnesota, fondly, and then we moved on to Chicago. My wife's from Chicago, and many years ago, I was transferred to San Francisco with the company I was working for at that time. So we've been in San Francisco a long time now, and but really we still consider ourselves Midwesterners.
Great. Well, we're happy to claim you as a Midwesterner, being one myself. So you started running almost by accident, it sounds like. And I guess this dates back to your days of living in Michigan when a friend possibly was running a marathon, maybe, or something of that nature.
Yes, initially I wasn't a big fan of running. When I played, football or other sports in school, if you were late for practice or jumped off sides, you're staying after practice and running sprints. It was all negative reinforcement. So I pretty much hated it. And then in college, I would run, 3 miles here and there. And then when I was in Chicago, I had a roommate that was running a marathon, and I went along and cheered him along on my bicycle. And I always thought I should try and run one before I was 40 years old because then it'd be too old to run one. Well, I ran my first one at age 42, and I guess I caught the bug to say the least.
Yeah, I'd say 110 later and still counting. So that's quite an accomplishment from the age of 42 on. So that would have taken us to what about 1996? Does that sound about right if my
Yes,
math is
that's
correct?
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what, just out of curiosity, which marathon was your first?
My first one was New York City, and I chose that because I figured it was a big one, and I needed all the disassociative, atmosphere and behavior I could garner up. And they bragged about having tens of thousands of runners and 1 million spectators, and I ran the marathon in '96. But what I didn't tell you is in '95, I had a friend running, never been to New York, and I said, "Well, we'll go and maybe run a few miles with you." And I ran 8 miles with him toward the end. It's the longest I'd run in my life. I think I was sore for a week. But I told my wife in '95, I said, "I'm gonna come back here and run the whole thing next year." And she's like, "Yeah, right." And because that's the longest I'd ever run in my life. And so we came in '96 and I finished, and it was a great experience. And I said, "You can't imagine what I saw in all 5 of these boroughs and what I witnessed." And I said, "We're gonna come back here every year the rest of my life as long as I can run." And I've never missed a year since.
That's amazing. So, uh, and I guess that included, were there 2 virtual races where one with Hurricane Sandy and then I guess another one with COVID? Is that correct?
Yes, in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy, we were there, and then they announced, like, at 5 PM on a Friday evening that they're gonna cancel the marathon. And I part of that was, people on both sides of the fence of that issue. But uh, they had a front page picture in the newspaper that day of huge generators size of school buses at the finish line. They said, "Couldn't this be put to better use in Staten
Right.
Island?" And so
Yeah.
that wasn't so good. And then in 2020, all the marathons, Boston, New York, the big ones in Chicago, they had virtuals, and you could run those anywhere and you upload your data.
So that sounds like, about is that 28 and counting? Is that what we can count on, for the New
Yeah, I
Yorks?
don't count Sandy, but
Okay.
yeah, so as far as New York road runners go, it would be 28 in a row on their website.
Okay. And then at what point did you okay, we're running, you're gonna do the marathon. At what point did you turn this into an opportunity for you to give back?
I think it was 1998, New York Road Runners that puts on the marathon. They sent a postcard to everyone that had gained entry to run for Fred's team. Fred LeBeau was the founder of the New York City Marathon. He's the one that took it from laps around Central Park to the 5 boroughs in 1976. And he ultimately passed away with cancer. He was treated at Sloan Kettering. Uh, he's the one that sent a letter and plane tickets to Greta Weitz, uh, who was a 5-time European cross country champion. She lived in Oslo, and she never ran a marathon. She was shorter middle distance runner. And so she flew to New York with her husband, and the longest training run was 13 miles. And they went out and had a big steak the night before and a bottle of Cabernet. And she got up the next day and she won the marathon and set a world record.
How about
And she
that?
and she went on to win it a total of 9 times. And so she was the coach for Fred's team. And this Fred's team was to raise money for uh, cancer research at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I met her. I signed up. I said, "Let's put these miles to good uses. Let's raise some money." And then I met her, and she was the coach. And the hook was set in me for sure then.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you're trained by a Olympic silver medalist in 1984 and a world record holder in multiple events, including the marathon. That's pretty cool. So, did she send you a training log, or how did that work? Did you?
Well, she designed those for Fred's team, and back in those days, Fred's team was probably, I'd say 20 or 30 people, and we'd get together, and then afterwards, we'd meet at a restaurant or bar called Mickey Mantle's on Central Park South, and, we'd have a few massages and get together and tell our stories of our run. So, it was a very small group, and this year, it's grown. This year, there were 1,100 runners on Fred's team,
Oh my gosh!
and in 1998, when I started, that was the only charity. Now there's probably 200 charities associated with the New York City Marathon.
Wow, that's incredible. So, one of the things that I kind of glossed over, and I think I might have even missed it, is you have won the Abbott medal multiple times. And first of all, what is the significance of that, and how did that all come about?
The Abbott medal is 6 marathons: Tokyo, Boston, London, Berlin, Chicago, and New York. And people that complete all 6 of those marathons receive this large medal with an emblem of each one of those cities. And there's a strong desire for people to do it. Even Joni Benoit Samuelson was so excited to receive that medal. She received it this year in Tokyo, and she was the first woman to win the gold medal in the Olympic marathon in 1984 in Los Angeles. So there's a strong draw where people want to have this medal. I think there's probably 15,000 or so people in the world that have achieved the 6-star medal. Uh, and they have a website and they keep track of all this stuff. And I've run 77 of those world marathon major races, which includes 28 New York City marathons and 25 Bostons and 21 Chicagos. And they add those up. So that 77 is more than anyone else in the world that has signed up, that has run those world marathon majors.
So you're a world leader.
That and $5 won't even get me to Starbucks.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but that is pretty inspiring and awesome. And then, kind of let's shift a little bit, kind of go back a little bit in time. You started as a part of Fred's team, and then we kind of maybe skipped over, but explain a little bit about Mikey's team and what you're doing for Sloan Kettering Medical Center.
Each year that I've raised money for cancer research for Sloan Kettering since 1998. And then in recent years, uh, they said, hey, you can have when I was doing my 100th marathon in 2019, it was going to be in New York. And they said, well, wouldn't it be nice if you pledged to raise $100,000 for your 100th marathon? And I said, well, I had raised 50 or 60,000 the year before. And I said, I don't have any idea how I could get to $100,000 for the year. And they said, well, you can have a team. So I put together some family and friends, and we combined all of our fundraising together. And that year we raised $309,000
Jeez.
in 2019. And so I've had a team, not in 2020, but in the other years since then. And we're usually between 2 and 300,000 each year. This year I had 14 team members. It's always a dicey deal because some people get hurt and some people have trouble fundraising. But for me, I've stayed pretty steady. The last 4 years, I've always been a little bit over $100,000 for myself. And to date this year, the team is at, I think, $177,000, but we'll get over 200,000.
Wow, that's pretty special. And the cause that you're doing it for is really inspiring. And along this journey, I mean, I know we could spend hours talking about this, and you and I will at some point. But for the listeners, you've met so many fascinating people. You've met world champions, but you also have met people that have had pretty tough hands dealt them. And you met a woman by the name of Audrey Barr, and her story, and you shared with me her story off air, and it was so inspiring. I think the listeners might really enjoy that, but also draw inspiration from it. And if you could
Aubrey
share
grew up
that.
Sure. Aubrey grew up in New Jersey, and when she was 4 years old, she was diagnosed with a type of leukemia, and she was treated at Sloan Kettering. And when I first met her father, he said to me, he said, "You'll never know what it's like to hear the words from a doctor saying there's nothing else we can do for your daughter." And he said it was just devastating. And they tried a protocol, and it didn't work. They tried another one. Finally, the third one, it worked, and she was traveling back and forth from New Jersey into Manhattan for these treatments for on and off for 7 years. And, since then, she's had, uh, other troubles. She's had 2 wonderful children, and a wonderful husband, and she's become a dear, dear friend. And, I've actually the last couple of years, I paced her and I ran the New York City Marathon side by side with her in 22 and in 2023. And I go to the end of the earth for her. She's, run 40 some odd marathons. People thought she would never, ever be able to do this, and she's dedicated her life, to trying to pay back Sloan Kettering.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. And, for those listeners out there that, um, aren't really familiar with, marathons and times, you also had the privilege of training one of the Sloan Kettering physicians. Uh, and how did you take upon that task?
That started, in 2021. I received an email from the director of Fred's team, and she asked if I would pace this, oncologist at Sloan Kettering, who is a, very prominent doctor there, and she asked one other gentleman by the name of Chris Busby. And the 2 of us ran the marathon after, 9/11. It was probably 6 weeks later, and he had, asked someone if they would he was trying to raise money, and so he went to Merck and Pfizer and some of these big pharma companies, and he got someone to say, "If you could break 4 hours," his best time was 4:06, I think, before that, "we'll give you $10,000 for the charity." And then they negotiated a deal, "We'll give you $1,000 for every minute under 4 hours." So
Okay.
he had 2 other people to match this deal, so our deal was $30,000 if we could break 4 hours and $3,000 a minute. And so we thought we'd carry him if we had to. But, he trained really hard with Chris in Central Park. They both lived in the New York area, and, he ran 3:44. The 3 of us ran 3:44 that day, and with additional monies, he raised $179,000 in 2001. And his family was at the end, his 3 young children, his wife, his mother. He was in tears, and he said, it was one of the greatest days of his life. And, we've since gone on to run 5 or 6 marathons with him. And when I was most recently in New York a few weeks ago, I had dinner with him 3 times. I mean, he's a dear friend. He's 73 or 4 years old, and he doesn't consider it work. He just can't wait to get up at 4:30 every morning and get to work because get to his office because of the research and the breakthroughs that they're accomplishing right now.
Well, I'm sure he's very grateful for having you and Chris train him to 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 raise that money for a wonderful research that they're doing to help those afflicted with cancer. Um, Let me, you seem like a pretty stoic guy, Mike, but I wonder, have you ever finished a marathon without any tears in your eyes?
I have, but
Okay. Very
the
few.
I'm al it you're always a little bit nervous no matter how many you do because you never know what you're gonna be dealt with that day, how you feel, how the weather is. Uh, I wear a, rubber band, bracelet, and I received it years ago, and it says, "Lord, please guide my steps." And, I can do all things through Christ, and I wear that, and I repeat that. Those are my 2 mantras while I'm running, and, I'm very, very blessed, and I thank God every day for the strength that he's given me to be able to do these things and hopefully try and make a little bit of a difference.
Well, you are, and I know you're inspiring others. You mentioned Chris Busby, and I'd like for you to kind of introduce to the audience, who he is and what that friendship has meant to you.
Well, that's how I first met him was when they asked us to pace that gentleman in 2001. So since then, we've run New York every year together, and we've run in Berlin and London, and we've run above the Arctic Circle in Norway and Tromsø. We've run in Calgary, Canada. We've run a lot of places together, and he is always run for Fred's team too.
That's pretty cool. What's your go-to pre-eat or pre-race meal the night before? What do you kind of go with?
I'm kind of old school and boring. I eat a lot of pasta probably for 3 days ahead of time,
Okay,
and,
okay.
so I don't deviate too much with that and nothing too spicy, and, in the morning, I'm a bowl of cereal and a banana kinda guy.
There you go. So you and Chris have shared a lot of pasta together along with a lot of miles. One light question I didn't ask, and I think the listeners might be interested is, what's your go-to running shoe?
I It's a funny story. When I was 10 years old living in Stamford, Connecticut, we had neighbors down the street. We had a family of 5, they had a family of 7, and I was an altar boy. And my mass captain was one of those 7 kids that lived down the street, and his brother, went on of those 7 kids, 4 of them spent a minimum of 30 years each at Nike, and for their careers. One of them went on to be the CEO and chairman of the board, and he's 44 years, and he's still there. He's the vice chairman of the board now, and, so I don't think you'd ever catch me wearing anything besides Nikes. Eh.
Okay.
Not
Well,
to mention, full
that's a good.
disclosure, I'm a shareholder for the last 40 years too.
Okay, okay. Well, there is a vested interest in, both on both accounts. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're a loyal, Nike, supporter and, endorser of their products. But, are you part of their, team Nike, you and Jordan and the other crew?
No, I'm not included in any
Okay.
of that stuff. All I do, receive a nice discount on the shoes, though.
There
Friends and
there you
family
go.
thing.
Well, you talked about, some of your other relationships, and, I didn't know, the listeners might be interested to know about some of the other, people that you've met along the way and lives that have inspired you, but you've also inspired. Any others that might come to mind?
Well, there's a couple others going back to Greta White's, uh, she invited us to Norway, Fred's team. There were 13 of us, and, we were gonna run this marathon, 7 or 800 miles north of Oslo and Tromsø. Well, Greta was being inducted into some Hall of Fame here in the States. She couldn't make it, so her husband, Jack, who was also her coach, he invited us to come. So we went and spent 7 days in Norway. We played golf at his country club and we went fishing, and we developed a really terrific friendship as a result of that. And I actually had dinner with him 2 weeks ago when we were in New York. And
Wow.
Greta since passed away, but we've remained great friends now for the last 24 years.
So I guess that's another example to our listeners of kind of putting themselves out there, being aware of and being present, but also being open to what the world is giving them and really what God is gifted them, and then using those gifts and to their fullest. Um, so w- one of the things that we talked about in your introduction, and I don't want to gloss over this, Mike, because I think it's really important. And I know you're a humble guy and you're very selfless, but you battled cancer yourself recently. And if you're willing to share that with the listeners, why don't you share that and explain how that has gone?
Sure. Got a call. I was in New York City in March this year, and I got a call. I was there to run a half marathon, and I got a call from my dermatologist here, and a biopsy came back and said it was, test positive for melanoma. And so, first thing I thought was, well, I'll get a hold of Dr. Shearer, my friend that I spoke about earlier that I'd paced. And so we had dinner with him on that weekend, and he said, "Well, let me see what I can do." And I sent him all of the reports and uh, emails that transferred to him, so he could take a look at that. And he texted me back. He said,
Okay.
"How many marathons have you run for Fredstein?" And I texted him back 54. He said, "Okay, that's what I need." One of the things I thought of, but I wanted to make sure I had the number right. I woke up the next day at 5 a.m. on Monday, and he sent me a text and he said, "Here's the phone number of the head of the dermatology oncology department, Sloan Kettering. This is his cell number. He's expecting your phone call. Call." So I called the gentleman, and he said he was not in New York City that day. He was out in Westchester County. And I said, "Doctor," I said, "you just tell me when and where, and I'll be there." And he gave me 50 minutes of his time. We did everything, and he said, "You need to have this surgery." And I said, "Well, this is March 18th." I said, "Is it any way we could put it off for 3 weeks?" He said, "Well, I wouldn't really recommend it." "Why?" I said, "Well, because," I said, "on April 15th, I said, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon." He's like, "Yeah, so what?" Uh, you know, and I said, "Well, there's a little more to it than that." I said, "It's going to be my 25th Boston Marathon in a row. And the only opportunity I'll ever have to go into the quarter century club at Boston, because you have to do them consecutively." And so we brokered a deal that I could hold off on the surgery for 3 weeks so I could run that and get in. There's 108 active members in the world in the Boston Marathon Quarter Century Club. So we got that done the next week after Boston. I had this surgery as a 5.5 hour surgery. And they were luckily, it didn't spread into my lymph system. They took out lymph nodes. And as a result of that, I'll, it's a minor deal, but I'll deal with the lymphedema probably the rest of my life. But I am so appreciative. And when I was in New York a couple weeks ago for the marathon, I went back and saw the same oncologist for a 6-month follow up. And I walked out of that building at Sloan Kettering, and I felt like I was the luckiest guy in the world. I was so fortunate, so appreciative, because that's a building full of people that have uh, a lot of serious things going on. And, I've been so blessed to, where I am and what I have.
Yeah, it's a pretty sobering experience being there in the oncology waiting room and seeing all those inspiring people facing their battles head on. So one of the, your partner in a lot of this, we haven't really spoken too much about Helen, but your partner in all this, I assume, is Helen. And what has that relationship meant to you, and how special has that life been together?
Well, I'm pretty lucky that she's hung around with me for 42 years and put up with me. For starters, uh, actually, I guess it's maybe more than that. We met in 1979 in Chicago. And anyways, and she's been a absolutely number one supporter, putting up with anytime you got to put up with just one spouse that's a runner and the other one's not a runner. You gotta listen to all these boring stories and things that you really don't. You got to pretend to be interested in. But she's probably attended 105 of those 111 marathons. Been a tremendous supporter, and we've traveled all over to do that. And trust me, I couldn't do it without her support.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're blessed, and I'm sure she feels the same way about you and what you two have accomplished together. Because I think it is together, really, I do. Um, so just kind of walk us through. I mean, running a marathon is one thing, but kind of take us through the some of the challenges that some of our listeners might face when preparing to do one, and how they might be able to solve some of those challenges.
But there's always challenges, because any marathon runner you talk to, there's going to be some niggles along the way. Whether it's a soreness or a pain or an injury, uh, much less, cancer or some dear family member that's going to get married on the day you plan to run the marathon. I mean, life happens, and, running a marathon is not the most important thing. But to put together these crazy streaks that I've referred to is, you gotta be careful. I mean, I have a good relative is getting married next April, and I said, "Well, don't plan it for the 3rd Monday in April because I can't be there." But so there's silly things like that that happen, but for some to suggest to someone I I think that, anyone that puts their mind to it can do it. You see all sizes and shapes, and there's no pressure on people to run a certain time these days. The marathons craze right now is incredible, and this six-star thing has made it even more so at the big cities. 800,000 people applied in the lottery to get into the London Marathon next year,
Oh,
and they accepted something like 20,000 out of 800,000. In New York City, 185,000 people applied in the general lottery, and I think they took 9,000
oh my gosh.
people. So it is so tough to get into these marathons, but unless you're running for a charity, and they have hundreds of charities associated with them. But you can start off if you could just run to the corner around the block. I could give you a training program that would get you to a marathon. You just start with baby steps, and the next day you run 2 blocks, and the next day you run 3 blocks, and maybe you walk a minute in between each block. But anyone that wants to put their mind to it can do it.
Yeah. Well, I think I think it's all the encouragement a lot of people need is the mind over matter and getting it done. Um, One of the things, I'm going to assume something based on your age that you're familiar with the Beatles and maybe even a Beatles fan. But one of the things in one of the lyrics in one of their songs was, um, "The love you take is greater than the love you make." And I think in looking at your life, I know you've given a lot, and believe me, I can see it in not just the money, but the time, the energy, and the effort. But what have you gotten out of this life experience of 111 marathons and raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, meeting world-renowned athletes, but also inspiring young people on their cancer journeys?
I'd say the most, valuable thing that I've received is, I'm at a place now because I kept showing up. Just keep showing up. And by doing that, all of a sudden, I never had a goal. Hey, how many could I run or how many in a row? It didn't make any difference. It just evolved into that. But what's special about it is I'm in a place where I've made these friendships, uh, not only with people at Sloan Kettering, but also with the 2 to 300 people a year that I'm trying to get into their checkbooks every year for 20 some odd years. And so it's rewarding for me. I've kept in contact with friends, every year. They're expecting an appeal from me, and we have some emails or texts or a phone conversation. So the friendships are incredible, and the new friends that I've made in the Sloan Kettering journey the last 25 years, you just couldn't put a price tag on it. It's unbelievable, the friendships. And then when you're trying to get that many people to sponsor you, anytime, I shouldn't say anytime, but many times, if someone in their family is ill, or a neighbor is ill, they come to me and they say, "Hey, could you help us out?" And that's what's rewarding. I mean, as I was on the phone today with a friend, and he has cancer, and he happened to have an appointment at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota today. And I got the results of that day, but I'm trying to help him with, can Sloan Kettering also be of help? And so I spend a great deal of time, and that is so rewarding to me to be able to be of some help and to give back.
With your experience with cancer, and you talked about the Boston Marathon, and then you were able to have the procedure done. Did that interrupt any of your training or any of your preparation for any of the other marathons then?
It certainly interrupted the training, but I planned it to where I run Boston in April, and then not my next marathon typically in recent years is Chicago in October. So I had lots of time to,
Okay.
crawl my way back.
And obviously, you and Mike Need met on your way to the Chicago Marathon. So that's where we are. Um, Gosh, so Chicago and New York are pretty close in time, right? If I'm doing the
Yeah,
math.
this year is 3 weeks. Sometimes in the past, it's been 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
sometimes.
Okay, so pretty quick. Um, so one of the things that uh, I always like to ask, or the guest, excuse me, is there something in your life that you've experienced or a challenge that you've faced that you're grateful for having gone through it, or you're grateful for having done it, or you're grateful for that experience? And what would that be for you? I mean, I think I know the answer, but what if you could tell that to the listeners and explain a little bit?
Well, I'm really grateful for, having the God-given ability to be able to do this. That's probably the most important thing. And we talked about the support, because you can't just do it alone. And every single day, I am, humbled and grateful for being able to do what we've talked about, Bill.
Yeah, well, it shows, and you're giving back also as inspiration to us all. Um, it's funny. And I'll digress just a little bit. Uh, my brother started this podcast, and I know you never got a chance to meet him. But one of the things that I thought of as I was literally just kind of writing down some notes to prepare for this was in 1999, uh, Matt decided that he was going to run a marathon. Well, before that, I had run the inaugural Flying Pig Marathon here in Cincinnati, and and the only reason I completed it was because Matt met me about 6 or 8 miles out and basically walked me in through the finish line, and he was so inspired as he saw the crowd, he saw the people, as you mentioned, finishing all shapes, all sizes, all abilities, that he decided that he wanted to do the Chicago Marathon. So he joined Team in Training and then raised money for pediatric cancer research for the Cincinnati Children's Medical Center. So we're kind of bringing this full circle with you doing the Chicago Marathon here in 2024 and meeting Mike Need on your way to do that. And then, Matt doing his actually his one and only marathon, but also trying to help raise awareness in cancer and cancer research money. So I thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence. I don't think there are coincidences. I think things happen for a reason, but I thought you might get a kick out of that. So
Yeah, that's terrific.
yeah, pretty cool. So, we're kind of getting near the end of our time here, but a couple things. I just want to thank you, um, Mike. This has been pretty inspiring for me, and I know it will be for our listeners. I think your superpower is your ability to do it, and your superpower is your ability to stick with it. Um, you've made a difference not only for cancer patients, but for all of people that want to run a marathon, want to be a part of this, and I think the connections that you've made with continue to make with your friends and the entire marathon community are really impressive, and it shows what can be done if we just are aware of that. Um, so thank you, Mike. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that, and on behalf of our
Thank you.
listeners, I think, and then, we're gonna encourage our listeners to, follow your journey, on Mikey's team. It's known as Mikey's team, and we will share that link in the show notes so they can, contribute and support that to the extent that they can and will, and, we hope that will help you get over your, 200,000 mark sooner than later. Um, to our listeners, Matt always reminded us to do three things every day to live life to the fullest. Number one, find something you're grateful for, regardless of how powerful your storm is. Be truly present with those that you are with. Pay attention to what you're feeding your mind, your body, and your soul. And again, a huge thanks to our guest, Mike Kloepfer, for always being present to those around you and for joining us today To our listeners, remember, if you've been inspired and motivated by the show, please subscribe to the show, download it, share it with friends, and comment. With gratitude, Matt listeners, until the next time, find the courage to be grateful, and Godspeed, my friends.